Hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining me for today's class. Today we are going to look into the applications of the quality system regulations related to medical devices design control and development planning. Now we are going to go over the design controls. We are going to talk about what is a design, what are the requirements by FDA, and of course what are the requirements for documentation and for following the again the regulations and the standards again that are international, and some of course they are American. Then we are going to talk about the design and development planning. I'm going to go over the big picture, and then I'm going to drill down again, and of course in each lecture I'm going to continue to drill down and to focus on a specific I would say topic related to the design and development planning for medical devices. Then I'm going to just talk about a case study where we are going to look into a doctor who is in need of having a medical device, and then I'm going to explain how the doctor or the physician and how the patient and how the engineer are going to think and how they have to design that medical device, just through an example. Then I'm going to talk about the design input, and then I'm going to talk about the ISO 14971, which is related to risk management. Obviously, I'm not going to cover the entire ISO 14971, but I'm going to just talk about the relationship in between the design and development planning for medical devices and ISO 14971 for risk management. Okay, first of all, let's look at the big picture. The big picture, and again, this is coming from FDA website, is that usually we start with the user need. Now, the user need here in orange, background orange, can come from patients, from physicians, obviously from business people, but business or again, those who are in the healthcare sector. And we're going to look into what we should develop, what are the needs of the market of patients. And we are now going to talk with subject matter experts and with the user, so the patient, and obviously among the subject matter experts, we can talk about physicians, but we can also talk about engineers and those who are going to design a medical devices or a new medical device. So when we are looking into the user needs, the next step is to look into the design input. So what are the inputs? Are there sensors? Are we connecting the device to something, to a patient? Are we going to connect a device to an existing device, another computer system, for example, or what we are going to do? So this is the design input that we are going to talk about today. Then we are going to look into the design process. So we are going to design the process with which the medical device is going to work. Is it going to get some information from a sensor, from another system, how this is going to be, again, imported, and then how within the system this is going to be processed. And then we talk about design output. So now how the information is going to be shown. Is it on a monitor? Is it going to be again through I would say a computer-based I would say language? Is it through a sound? How is going to be again to be showed to the patient or to the physician? And then obviously we are going to go do the iteration. It means that we are going to verify. So in between design input, designing the process, and designing the output, we are going to do the test and we are going to verify. This is why you see here the verification in between design input, process, design process, design output, and again coming back to design input. So after a few iterations, we're going to obviously test, and each time we are going to have a system to review that. For example, we have to review also the user needs. We are going to look into if there is any new design that is in the market, if there is something new that is happening, is there any new technology that is now being available to us. Same thing for the design input. We are always going to review the design, and this is going to be done among, I would say, during the the verification cycle. So once we pass the verification cycle, we are now going to, of course, go through the regulatory steps in order to submit and to register our medical device. So from the time where we're looking into the user needs through the input design process and the output design, we are looking into scientific activities. And of course, once we are now passing to the medical device regulations and submissions and registration, we are now going to look into the regulatory requirements. And of course, once the medical device is on the market, we will still have to do the validations and reviewing the plan and reviewing the design for the input, the process, and the output, because the medical device may not be at 100% safe, it may not be at 100% accurate. We may have new technologies that are going to make the function of that medical device much better, improving that. So as long as your medical device is on the market, it's also the text of the law that you have to go through the validations and to look into reviewing the design of your medical device, which is on the market. Now let's go over the purpose for each of those, I would say, steps that we talked about. So when you're talking about planning, we need to document and identify the scope of the project. So this is a project. And as a project, and of course you will need to know or learn about the project management as well, we need to define the project. And here we are going to do the planning, and this is a way to document the identification and the scope of the project. So we write down, we would like to have a medical device that is having these functions, going to be used for this type of functions, this is going to be used by this type of patients, and it needs some type of training or some type of maintenance or calibration, etc. This is the planning, and we are going to identify the scope. Then we are going to look into the user needs. So the user is usually the patient, not always, maybe also a doctor who is going to use it on patients. And then here we are going to define the user needs. Here we talk about requirements. We need to have for example, a device which is again mobile. It can be. It's not very heavy. It will have a battery. It doesn't need to be necessarily, for example, plugged in. It needs to have some software in it. The software must be or may not be connected to internet, to a specific website. So these are all of the user needs that we are going to write in another document. And don't forget that I just talked about the device, its weight, of course the energy that it uses, some software, but also what it does. We also need to write down in the user needs what are the needs for that medical device. Then we are going to continue with the design input. So we define and design the inputs, and here we write that in a product specification. What are the inputs? Is it the patient has to, it's a pump, for example, and the patient has to, again, have a needle and then to put that in, I would say, to use it subcutaneously? Is it, again, a device that is using non-invasive procedures? Is the device which is outside, which is in the hospital, for example, and it's going to be connected to other devices or other sensors? This is, again, in a nutshell, I would say, the design input. You can also have, of course, the design process, which is not in the table, where we are writing down about how the process should be done. Processing of the information that the device is getting, because as you know, any system has an input, output at the process. So here we talk about the input, the design input. We have also need to talk about the output, so the design output. Here we identify and establish design outputs and verification methods. It means testing. It means we say that this device is doing, for example, is measuring the heart rate, but we will have to verify that. So we are going to use the device, but we're also going to use another way to measure the heart rate, and we are going to check, to verify, and to validate and document it, the fact that this device is working, is working again well, and it's giving us the adequate and correct numbers. Then we have design verification. This is to demonstrate the product meets the design input. So here what we do, we are going to have a checklist. It's a type of validation procedure where we are going to write down in one column that what the device should be doing. Now we talk about the device that should be plugged in. For example, the device must have what type of shape, what type of functions now, how it should be working, how it can be turned on, to be used, then to be turned off, then how we can use the results of the measures, for example, or if the device is, again, doing something or replacing, for example, a physiological, I would say, condition, if it allows, for example, people to walk or to, again, move, or if it's doing any type of measure, or if it's a kit, for example. So we have to demonstrate that the device is meeting the requirements of the patients or again, the users. Then we need to validate it. So the validation is, again, as I mentioned, we are going to check if the device can be plugged in. We do it, yes, it works. Now we're going to see if the device has a shape as it should be for being very effective. We're going to measure the dimensions of the device, for example, looking at the shape, and then we are going to write in the second column in front, yes, in the validation document, that yes, it is doing that. Then for each and every functionalities of the device, we are going to question that, or we're going to write down a statement to say, okay, test this function in the device. If that the function A is working in the column in front of that, I would say, functionalities, we're going to check, yes, this is done, validated. So we will continue to go over each and every functionalities of a device, and we are going to write in front of that functionality that, yes, after testing, that device is working. This is how we do the validation, and we are going to document that. So you can validate a software, you can validate a device, you can validate a measuring device, all medical devices, and those validations are going to let us know that for each and every functionalities that have been designed and then produced, they are all working. And then it shows that the device is validated. We keep that validation document in our files, and we're going to use it as well for the registration of the device. Then we also have the market release. This is to launch product into manufacturing and marketplace as well. So now let's talk about the design controls. So design controls provide managers and designers with improved visibility of the design process. With improved visibility, managers are empowered to more effectively direct the design process. That is, to recognize problems earlier, make corrections, and adjust the resource allocations. And obviously, we document all of the steps included or involved in this process. Now, designers benefit both by enhanced understanding of the degree of conformance of a design to users and patient needs, and by improved communications and coordination among all participants in the process. So we are having those documents, we are having those procedures. Those documentation and procedures are required by regulatory authorities in each country. So if, for example, looking to Health Canada or looking into FDA, we are going to see that, yes, indeed, we do have regulations in place, and we have to document, we have to validate, we have to have a document for design inputs or design process or design outputs, or for the validations as well. Now, what is the FDA approach to design control? FDA takes an umbrella approach to define the regulation. Now, as a result, FDA allows significant allowance for interpretations. The aim of FDA or any other regulatory authority is not to prevent companies to make new medical devices. The philosophy behind is that we need more. Of course, we are advancing in technology. We need more devices, more accurate, more helpful devices, safer devices as well. And we may not always in advance know about the new technologies or new risks, for example, associated with the use of a medical device. And this is why FDA is using several types of regulations or standards as well, depending on the medical devices. For example, we have, again, regulations related to the medical device as a software. The same applies to Health Canada and, of course, to other countries in the world as well. So here, this is an umbrella approach to define the regulation. Now, let's go over the waterfall diagram for the, again, making a device. This is from product conception to end of life. On the left, I put the FDA reference diagram. When we start with the user needs, we go through the design input, design process, then we go over the design output, we do the validation iteration, and we continue to review, of course, the user needs, the inputs, the process, and output until we are going to reach a level where we are going to have our medical device, and then we are going to verify again and validate its functionalities based on the user requirements. Now we will need to go over several I would say tasks that we are going to see. So those tasks are well explained, of course, by FDA. The same applies to other countries, such as in Canada, such as, of course, the European Union region as well. And this is what we are going to see now in details. So first we are going to look into, again, several tasks or several segments of this waterfall, and then we are going to conclude with this diagram. So the first three tasks, or I would say gates, are the following. So these are specific activities in design set as a foundation. So stage one is a business strategy. We are going to do the project initiation. Don't forget that each of these, again, the devices, they are seen as projects. And we have to document the project. So we need to have a project initiation and documents as well. This is for stage one. We have to explain or to justify why we are going to work on or develop that device. Then in stage two, we are going to look into need finding and design planning. This is where we are going to talk with doctors, with patients, looking into the existing literature, and we are going to now define the business plan, and we are going to write the user needs. We define the user needs, and this is at the beginning of stage three. So in stage three, we are going to, again, look into the concept exploration and feasibility. Do we have the right technology? Do we have a safe technology? Do we have a technology that is valid now? Can we rely on that? Can we make it available to patients and to doctors, for example? So at the end, we are going to look into, after the feasibility studies and the concept exploration, we are going to end up having the design input that will be defined. So these are the definitions that we need, and of course they will be all documented. Then we are going to look into the other specific activities, and we call that make it work. So in stage four, we are going to look into the design engineering and creating prototypes. At the end of this stage, we are going to start the piloting or pilot production of again the devices, and we are going to have test articles. So at the end of the stage 5, we are going to again start with the design verification and validation. So this is again what I showed you and talked about from the FDA diagram, where this is an iteration, so in between the input, the process, and the output. And here we are going to validate, because we would like to make sure that each and every function that we are claiming to exist in the medical device is working, and we document it. And then if it applies, we will now go and test the device in humans. So we call here, of course, the clinical studies. Once the clinical study phase is over, we are going now to have the objective evidence that is compiled, and this is what we are going to use in order to prepare our application to register the medical device, again, if or when applicable. So this is where we are going to look into the regulatory approval. We are going to go to the web page of, again, any regulatory authority in any country where we would like to again register the product, and then we are going to look into what forms we have to complete, what type of packages we have to prepare, and of course among those packages we also need to have all of the documentations related to the design control of the medical device. Then in stage 9 is after having registered the medical device, we are going to be able to launch, of course produce, and then to launch the product to the market. Obviously, don't forget that once we are in the market, we still need to look into the risk management, looking into mandatory reporting or any I would say untoward medical occurrence experienced by our users of medical users that may or may not have been related to the use of the medical device, but we have to go over what we call a pharmacovigilance. So pharmacovigilance is not only applicable to the drugs, but also to medical devices. And then don't forget that when we are in the market, we will not stop looking into reviewing the design, because now new technologies may come. We may have some errors, some issues. We may have to do some recalls. It happens, of course. So we need also to have our quality management system, where we may now receive different complaints from our users or patients. We will need to do the root cause analysis, looking into the CAPA or corrective and preventive actions, and then we will need to continue to keep our product safe and, of course, with the efficacy that we need on the market. And obviously, which is also the case for many medical devices, is that we are going to have new technologies. We are going to have new, I would say, tools. And in this case, maybe an existing medical device in the market for the last, I would say, 5 or 10 years may not be anymore the one that we would like, because maybe we are now having medical devices that have more efficacy or a higher safety profile. This is where we are going to reach the end of life of the medical device as well. But what is very interesting is that when you're looking into different companies or medical device companies, they are having hundreds of medical devices. I'm talking about the big companies. And obviously we know in advance that some medical devices, they may stay on the market for 2 or 3 years. Some others, again, maybe 10, 15 years, but this will depend on the technology. It will depend also on the efficacy and safety profile of the medical devices on the market as well. That's because when we are looking into prototyping and we are going to test the device, obviously we are going to look into a frame, I would say a limited number of patients, and usually in clinical trials for medical devices, we are not having 6,000 patients. We are going to have maybe 10, 20 patients, those who are going to use the medical device. And based on 20 patients, we cannot always look into or find information related to the safety profile of the device. This is why these are all conditions in order to go to the market. But when we are in the market, we will still need to look into again, any harm that may have been caused by the device, any type of issue because maybe the documentation that we provided to patients were not comprehensive enough, and patients were not using properly the device neither. So these are all different considerations, of course, and that we have to keep in mind when we are having our medical devices. And don't forget that we need to continue again to check or review the design of a device which is already on the market. We have a document, again written by FDA, which is the Design Control Guidance as of 1997. I'm also again invite you to look into the document as well. The guidance, as it's written at the bottom of the slide, is relating to FDA 21 CFR Part 820-30 and Subclass 4.4 and ISO 9001, which is the Quality Management System. Now, when should design controls end? As I already mentioned, they never end. So as long as devices are in development, in production, or in the market or the field, design controls should be followed. Now, here we are looking into the design control elements. This is just a recapitulation of what we saw so far, in addition to some added information, because I would like to again, go over this lecture in a way that you don't have all of the information, at the same time, because we cannot, understand well all of those different, I would say, details in those control elements. So here on the left side, we already talked about the project initiation. I talked about the fact that these are all business projects as well, and but of course related to the health of the population. So we are going to first write down the user needs, and we are looking into the regulatory requirements. So from day 0, we are going to look into what are the regulations that we have to follow. Now, those regulations, depending on in which country you are, or depending on into which country you are planning to export your devices, we will need to take into consideration all of those regulatory and requirements for the standards. This is where we talk about ISO standards, we talk about ICH guidelines, we talk about, of course, several, I would say, 21 CFR parts that we are going to consider for this type of activities. So then in number 2, we see the design planning, in number 3, design input, design research and activities, and design outputs. So here, as you see, we have another new topic compared to slide number 2 that we covered, is about the design research and activities. Indeed, we do research on the design as well. We are looking into a design that an engineer already made, and we are going to look into, okay, whether or not we can make it, whether or not it's going to be, again, to have the efficacy, whether or not it has been done in other countries. And we are going to do research as well, because maybe a device that we are planning to make now has been already, prepared in other markets, maybe, again, in other countries. For example, they have again, more advanced technology and better tools, and in this case, we are going to do some research. If not, we can also have research activities ourselves in our company as well, where we are going to fine-tune, or we are going to improve existing technologies or tools that we may have. Then, of course, we talked already about the validation and the verifications in between the design planning and design output. Then we are going to go through another point, which is the design transfer. Why? That's because when we are doing our research, this is like research and development labs, we are going to do research. We look into the design as well. And once the design is well established, we are now going to write different documentation related to even how to make those devices, including the software as well, if applicable. And then we will need to transfer that from research and development labs into again a manufacturing facility where we'll be able to upscale the production. It's very similar to the drugs. Here for medical device as well, we cannot again make 200 million devices in a lab. We will need to transfer the technology, or of course we call here to design transfer, and then to be able to again do the mass production of that device. Now, after, again, this, when we have the device, we'll need, of course, to go through the required regulatory pathways in order to register our medical device, depending on in which country we are going to, again, register that product. So this is what we call the commercialization. Then, as I already explained in the previous slide, we cannot stop there. We do not stop there. We need to make sure that the product that we are having on the market has the safety, efficacy, and the quality required as per the standards that we have. And I tell you something, we don't have highest or lowest standards. We have standards. And standards are here in order to help us to provide the highest quality possible of those devices and, of course, drugs or any other product that we are making. Now, after the commercialization, we do have, of course, some I would say tasks. One of them is the post-design control. We look into the design, we control that, we look into the design input, we do research, for example, as well, even during the fact that we are on the market, and then look into the design outputs. And we are going also to do what we call post-market surveillance. This is when I talk about pharmacovigilance. Here, when we talk about post-market surveillance, we do have to report any safety issue experienced by our users of medical devices to the regulatory authorities, not only in the country in which, only one country in which the issue occurred, but in any country where we are selling, and of course we are on the market for the same medical device. And now, for example, in Canada, we will need to, if there's any issue, any untoward medical occurrence experienced by a patient using our medical device, we'll need to produce what we call mandatory reporting. And the timelines are 10 days and 30 days after the time when, the event occurs, or when the company becomes aware of the occurrence of the event. The same thing applies to FDA, where we will need to use Form 3500A in order to report any, safety issue experienced by any medical device user, and we have to submit that to FDA. But again, don't forget that this is not just a matter of reporting, it's a matter of collecting information and then to continue to do the post-surveillance or pharmacovigilance work, which is to collect, of course, assess, report, but also to prevent harm to our patients. This is where, when we look into the post-design control and post-market surveillance, we always talk about the following procedures. These are SOPs that we need to have in place. These are teams that we need to have in place in our medical devices manufacturing facilities or companies. One of them is CAPA, which is the corrective action and preventive action. This is where we need to have a quality assurance system in place where we can collect the complaints. After the complaints, we are going now to assess the complaint, doing what we call a root cause analysis, because maybe we just received 1 or 2 reports, but we do have much more people who have been experiencing the issue, but they didn't report, they don't know how to report, or maybe they have not been yet exposed to that because maybe the harm would occur after, for example, several months of use of the device. I'm just talking about hypotheses here. But we need to make sure that our device is safe. We are here to protect the well-being of the population, not to harm them. Of course not. And it's illegal. So when we talk about CAPA, this is the next process after the root cause analysis, where the QA department is going to learn about, okay, is it because of the batch? Is there any batch that is defective? Is it a raw material? Is it defective? Is the software which is defective or has some bugs, for example? So now QA is going to put in place what we call, or using the procedure that we call corrective action and preventive action, where we are going to finding out the root cause, and then we are going to correct the issues. We are now going to add more, I would say, activities into prevention of that issues. Now, how we do that? It may be recalibrating an equipment. It may be purchasing a new equipment. It may be training employees. It may be any type of action where we are going to prevent those, I would say, those deficiencies in the product. Obviously, we also have MDR, which is medical device regulation. We have always to be in full compliance with the regulations. Now here we talk about FDA, but the same thing applies to Health Canada, to EMA, to any other, I would say, regions where we are selling our medical devices. Obviously, the next one, which is complaints, is that, yes, we need to have a system in place where we receive all of the complaints from customers. But it's not just from customers. We also receive complaints or reports from insiders, from employees as well. We need to collect the information. QA does it through the quality management system, where each of those cases that is coming is going to be recorded, it's going to be opened, and then someone is going to be assigned to look into those issues and complaints, and then those complaints may be closed, maybe again closed because maybe it was just one occurrence and it wasn't that, I would say it was not causing any harm to anyone, but it was just a report, okay? But sometimes it may be something that may harm the population. It may also cause some deficiency. So we need to look into each and every complaint, open them, have them reviewed by a subject matter expert, and then to close the case, or Sometimes the case may end up by having a recall of the badge of that medical device. Now we also need to look into regulatory changes, any requirements, new requirements, because in this case, if we are having any requirement, we will need also to apply those new regulations as well. Now we may also look into new hazards. Hazards may not be only related to your medical devices. It may be because there is another device, another product, something else, another condition that is now new in the life of our patients that is now going to cause a type of deficiency or malfunctioning or maybe misinformation or misuse of the medical device because of those new hazards that we find. So we have to find them out. Now we also have deviations. It means that now deviations, we may of course look into deviations where the process of making the device has been deviated and it will cause deficiency, but deviation can also be deviation from the best way to use the device. So here we talk about the instructions or the manual for using the medical device. We also need to review that manual based on the cases that we receive for the from the post design controls and post-market surveillance. We will also need to update the user manual for the medical device as well, because again, we may not be aware of all of the risks. We want to stay on the market having a safe and a product with the efficacy that it needs to be, and with of course the highest quality based on the international standards. Now, you can always refer to ISO 1345 or FDA 21 CFR Part 820 for the quality management system and or quality system regulations. So here, for example, you have on the left side the topics related to the design control, and you do have in the two columns on the right side ISO 1345 and FDA 21 CFR 820. You have the relevant sections that are again addressing the topic. So we have, for example, design control that you can see in ISO 1345 in section 7.3, and in FDA 21 CFR 820 you can find that in the part 820.3. So the same thing applies to the design reviews, design planning, design change, input, etc. What it shows here is that we have regulations like FDA 21 CFR Part 820, or we have standards, international standards like ISO 1345, where they have sections where they are telling us what to do, how to stay in compliance. And now if you want to stay in compliance, you have to have your procedures in writing that are going to always refer to different subsections in those regulations or in the standard. We will need to follow these, and we have to document the fact that we followed the standards and or the regulations whenever applicable. Now let's talk about the design and development planning. So if you read 21 CFR Part 820-30B, it states that each manufacturer shall establish and maintain plans that describe or reference the design and development activities and define responsibility for implementation. It also says that the plans shall identify and describe the interfaces with different groups or activities that provide or result in input to the design and development process, and the plans shall be reviewed, updated, and approved as design and development evolves. Here in front of you, you do have a text of the law where it allows you to write standard operating procedures. Now, the first SOP, for example, can be on establishment and maintenance of plans for the medical device. Now here we talk about, we describe the design and development activities and define responsibilities within the company. Another SOP can be, the identification and description of the interfaces. Here we are going to, assign that to different groups of activities, and we are going to write down what are the inputs and outputs of that document. Another SOP can be a review and update the approved designs and evolution of the development. Now again, you don't need to have 3 SOPs from here. You can have 1 SOP, But what is important is that this is the text of the law, and this is the standard that is being required I would say by the regulatory authorities, so that we will follow those standards. So we have to have procedures in place. We have to, again, follow the standards. We also have to produce documentations showing that we have been in full compliance with these regulations. Now, elements of plannings, for example, if you would like to add more into the SOP and of course to the documents, we can talk about the description of the goals and objectives of the design and development programs are the following. For example, what is to be developed? We are going to write down about that. Then we have, for example, identification of the major tasks to be undertaken. So we are going to write down in the document what are the major tasks to be undertaken for our specific device. Same thing for deliverables of each task and individuals or organizations who are responsible to perform those tasks. Then we also need to describe or to write the scheduling of major tasks to meet overall program, and then identify major reviews and decision points, etc. They talk about the notification activities and controls for design documentation. So when you produce a document which is related to planning a medical device, we will need to have this document in writing, because if it's not in writing, it never happened. So we need to show to inspectors who are coming, and of course when you're also going to apply for the registration of our medical devices, we will need to have enough documentations proving that from day zero, where we started to have our project for this medical device, we have been following the rules and regulations, and we need to have documented proof that we have been in compliance with these regulations. Now, in order to know where are those regulations, I already stated in another table 2 slides before that these are the regulations that we're going to use. Now, for each and every step in the production, design, of course, and production of our medical devices, we will need to refer to those requirements or the law required to be, again, followed. Now, we also have another section which is very important, and we have it in many ISOs. Of course, in the majority of ISOs, we have the management responsibility. So we need to have, for example, a recall management. So recall management must establish a quality policy and implement an organizational structure to ensure quality. These are typically documented in a quality manual or similarly named document. So each company has a quality manual. In the quality manual, we are defining who is doing what are the procedures in place in order to keep the quality or ensure the quality of the product. We also refer to the existing regulations and standards, as I already explained again in a table, and then we will need to keep that for the company. Now, in some cases, however, the design and development plan may also describe organizational responsibilities relative to design and development activities. We need to have a document or a documented proof to show that we have an upper management, we have a management, and what are their responsibilities in order to make sure that the medical device that is being designed and prototyped and then tested and then put on the market are following the standards, international standards, and the regulations. Now, the management must define responsibilities with clarity and without ambiguity. And when, again, input to the design is from a variety of sources, their interrelationships and interfaces should be defined, documented, coordinated, and controlled. This might be the case, for example, if a multidisciplinary product development team is assembled for a specific project, or if the team includes suppliers, contract manufacturers, users, outside consultants, or independent auditors. At the end of the day, we need to show that we are in full control related to all of the activities involved in the medical devices design, prototyping, and obviously approval and marketing. Let's go over the case study now. We have a physician, and the physician has a new idea for an asthma adherence monitoring device. This is what we call a user need. Now the question that we have is, why assume the user knows what they need? In fact, we need to have a physician, for example, an engineer as well. Why not a few patients to sit together and then to look into the user needs. In fact, I need, for example, they may say I need a very small apparatus. I want something that can work on batteries, something that is very easy to handle. It must also have a screen. I have to be able to read the screen. If not, for example, it must be also connected. It can be connected to my phone, cell phone, through a Bluetooth, so the interface is going to be much larger. I will be able to interact with that interface, and then I will be able to use the device. So these are just, in a nutshell, a few examples of, again, needs for medical devices. Now, we may say, okay, now we leave it to the engineer, and the engineer is going to translate that into the technology, because he or she knows about the technology. He or she is going to design one. Sometimes we say we have a need for this type of functionality, but there is no device, or there is no tool here. So we may even look into making a new tool, making a new device as well, or a component, in order to add it into this monitoring device for asthma adherence. Now, after the engineer is translating, it's going to write down how it will work. It's going to write down about the size, the properties. This is the design input. So the engineer writes that design input based on discussions with the physicians and with patients. Now that we have the design input, we are now going to ask the engineer to start making that a prototype. So this is going, of course, writing down first about the product. So the engineer is going to write the design and the development. We call that the design process. Then he or she is going to continue with the design output. And then the question here is, did we design the device right? This is a device verification. After that, we are going to see the engineer who is going to produce a prototype, for example, and then we are going to test it. We are going to go through iterations for the input, for the process, for the output, and then we are going to have a final device. But are we done? Not obviously, because now we have to test the device. We are now going to have it registered as well, and then when we are on the market, we will still continue to question or to review the design input, the design process, the design output, etc. Now, if you look into the, medical device production, you have two ways to look at that. You have a science cycle and you have a regulatory cycle. Here, I am talking about the science cycle. So everything starts on the top left with the design, where we can place the design here and you can look into the concept. So the concept is going to be based on, the input, process, and output. We talk about the design, input, design, process, design, output. And then based on, the case that we saw, we can talk about making a prototype. So the engineer is going to make the prototype, and then based on the prototype, we are going to now test it. Now, it may be preclinical, it may be clinical. We look into the mode of action, we look into any hazard analysis, we are going to make or create clinical evidence, and we are going to now look into, whether if this is the one that we would like to have the device, we are now going to go through the manufacturing. And don't forget that when we look into the manufacturing, of course, even before, we must have a quality system in place. So once we show that, our device is meeting the requirements set by the company, set by the design concept, of course, and the need of the patients, we will now be able to produce or make submission packages for different regulatory authorities, and then to submit the application to register the device in a specific country. And then we're going to look into the marketing, where we are now going to look into the commercial use. We're going to look into any untoward medical occurrence experienced by our patients using our device. And then we continue with the post-marketing surveillance, as you can see at the bottom left side of this picture. And again, depending on the technology advances, etc., we may now again reach an end of life. It may be after a few years, it may be after again a decade, for example, or more. It will depend again on the type of medical device. Now, let's go back to the design plan and the big picture, because in the next slides I'm going to talk about the design input only. So we looked into, again, the big picture where we have the user needs, we have the design input and requirements, and we are having a design process and design output. Then we have a verification, it's a type of iteration. Then we are going to, again, transfer the design, getting the medical device, and then we are going to validate the design based on the user needs. Now let's go over the design input requirements now. So as per 21 CFR Part 82030, related to the design input, each manufacturer shall establish and maintain procedures, so these are SOPs, to ensure that the design requirements relating to a device are appropriate and address the intended use of the device, including the need of the user and patient. Here you understand that for each device, you may have a set of SOPs. And in this case, we are going to have hundreds of SOPs if you're having if you have tens of devices, but we have to be in full compliance with the regulations. So here, when an inspector from FDA comes to your premises, obviously he or she is going to look into a documented proof of your compliance with 21 CFR Part 82030. And don't forget that when inspectors, they also come, they have a checklist and they're having different regulations, different requirements, and they're going to check each and every of those I would say regulations and check if we are having a documented proof that we have been in full compliance when we have been designing, producing, marketing, distributing our products. Now the procedures shall include the mechanisms for addressing incomplete, ambiguous, or conflicting requirements. And the design input requirements shall be documented and shall be reviewed and approved by designated individuals. Don't forget, these are procedures, so they must be reviewed a maximum every 2 years, as per the GMP. Or if you are in FDA, talking about FDA, as per CGMP. Now the approval, including the date and signature of the individuals approving the requirements, shall be documented. So in any SOP, obviously, we have, again, also a placeholder for the name of the authors, individuals, signatures, effective date, etc. Now the interpretation of what we saw is that the manufacturer must have a documented procedure to define who, what, how, why, and when of how design inputs are created and applied. So here I'm talking about a set of procedures in writing that are needed for the design input only. Of course, we have design output, we have design process, we have again prototyping, etc. For each and every of these steps, we do have regulations and requirements by the law for having procedures in place, people who are in charge in place, and then again justifications of and documentation of the fact that we have been in full compliance with the standards and regulations. Now, design input requirements must address the intended use of the device. Again, I would like to repeat that if you're having 100 medical devices, you're going to have 100 sets of procedures, documentations, and of course, a design inputs for the intended use for each of your devices. Now let's talk about the intended use versus indications for use. An intended use, this is a general purpose of the device and encompasses the indications for use. Now, indication for use is what are the diseases or conditions the device will diagnose, treat, prevent, cure, or mitigate. This includes a description of the patient population. So there's a difference between intended use and indication for use. Now, related to the deliverables, user needs is a quantifiable requirements for the safe and effective use of the device by user. A design input requirement, or DIR, is a document containing system level and subsystem level requirements. These are all documents that we need to have within our project. So before starting to create the design inputs. Now, referring again to 21 CFR Part 820.3F, design input means the physical and performance requirements of a device that are used as a basis for device design. So we need to document the concept, the design as well, and we need to keep the documents again in our package, in our submission package, because we will need also to use those documents when we are going to again apply for the registration of our device. Now the questions that we may have is, what's the difference between functional requirement and performance requirement? When we talk about function, we talk about a validity. It means that the product is doing what it has been done, it is meant to do. Performance is reliability. It means that the device, when it's used over time, it will do exactly the same functions with the same quality. So reliability means validity over time at each use. Now let's talk about again function versus performance requirements. Functional is to specify what the device does or the operational capabilities of the device. So this is the validity. Performance is to specify how much or how well the device must perform. Examples: the speed, strength, response time, accuracy, limits of operations. So this is reliability. So for how long that device is working and it's going to stay functional. So how long it's going to be reliable. Now talking about the example of design inputs, so we can talk about documents on performance requirements, on interface requirements, on labeling, on trainings, on regulatory, packaging, field service, electromagnetic compatibility, toxicity, and biocompatibility. So these are all different elements that may be in a design input document. Now, what are the categories of source of input? When we are doing a design input, we need to talk with the users. So we look into user needs. We also need to look into regulations like 21 CFR Part 820, different parts, and standards like ISO 13485. We also need to look into risk analysis controls, and here we do have again regulations and standards for the risk analysis. Now let's talk about the user needs now. These are marketing and sales input. So usually it's very subjective. The device should be easy to use, lightweight, reliable, etc. This is again the user needs. We want the device to work on a battery. We want the device to again be lightweighted and again simple to put in a pocket, for example, etc. And of course to do what type of functions. Now remember, these are often very soft and subjective requirements and need to be easily translated into quantifiable requirements. Now let's talk about the regulation and standard that are needed now. The design input requirements should include specific references to applicable regulations and or standards that are already mentioned. So high-level regulations or standard requirements may lead to compliance or insufficient verification or validation activities. It means that as an RA professional, we need to make sure that when we are going to prepare a package, we are meeting also all of the needs from the regulatory authorities in a specific country related to the standards, to the again quality assurance activities, and to the regulations of that country as well. So now let's talk about the risk management. For the risk management, I'm just going to talk about again different regulations like IECs. We can also talk about ISOs like ISO 14971 or ISO 13485, or again different I would say other ISOs like ISO 10993. So for example, ISO 13485 is for the quality management system, or for example, the ISO 10993 is biological safety. So here the aim is not to go over each and every ISO or again regulations that are related to risk management, because there are so many depending on different countries, but they're just examples that I'm giving you. Now, when you look into the big picture of the risk management according to ISO 14971, you can see that there are several, again, process requirements. We have, for example, the risk management planning. Now, in this, we are going to define the hazards. We are also going to define the hazardous situations. We will then write down and estimate the harm based on the hazardous situations. Then we are going to evaluate the risk. We will now set in place some ways to control the risk. Then we are going to think or talk about residual risks. And then we are going to end up by the production and post-production information. This is what I wanted to just state from the first line on the top of this slide. Now, obviously, if you were to look into the hazards, you can again look into the intended use, the technology, checking the design, the function, ways of misuse, for example, risk of misuse, information of clinical information and clinical procedures. If you would like to look into hazardous situations, obviously you are going to look into behavior or level of training or environment or the shelf life or lack of information. These are the hazard situations. And then we can look into the harms, so the injury, damage, adverse events, short-term and long-term damage, etc. So you can continue to look into, again, this type of tabulation, I would say, tabulated summary of the risks and risk management and planning up to production, post-production information based on the risk management according to ISO 14971. Of course, when we are looking into the documentation for a medical device, we are going to produce documents related to all of whatever is, of course, applicable, but related to all of these different topics on the top. So the risk management planning, the hazard situations. Now you can have one document going over, again, these requirements for ISO 14971. But this is in a nutshell, again, how the risk is managed. So we have to document the fact that we looked into the risks, we learned about the hazards, we did research on the harms and risk, we evaluated the risk, and then we did put in place some risk controls, and then we also look into residual risks. And after all of those different iterations and activities, we then decided to put on the market a safe and, again, valid product that has the performance or reliability as well. Now, if we are looking into the risk evaluations, this is very, again, suggestive. That's because we cannot always find exactly the same terminologies for the risks related to the use of a drug or a medical device. Now here what you see is a risk evaluation matrix with risk priority numbers or RPNs generated when multiplying the severity of harm risks. So here you have it in this table, which is again the corresponding probability of occurring ranks, which is in table 2. So what you can see on the left side, left table, where you have the probability of occurrence on the left and on the top the severity, we need to establish this type of risk evaluation matrix for each device. And what we do is that we are going to look into, again, establishing this table and write down, again, if this is, again, probability of occurrence, improbable, remote, occasional, probable, or frequent. And we are going to look into the severity, if it's negligible, minor, serious, major, etc. And then we are going to have another table called risk acceptability. where if this is green, it means that, for example, if we have a negligible risk, which is also has a very improbable occurrence, in this case, this is acceptable. That's why you see that on the top left side of the table on the left, where you have negligible colon and the row improbable, which is 1, the number. Now we may also establish, we say that if, for example, we are looking to a row occasional and looking to the severity minor, still we assign this number 7, 6, and we are going to say that no, it's an acceptable one. But if we see that there is a frequent risk or probability of occurrence for a critical issue in the device, here we give the number 25 that you can see on the table on the left, and then you go to the row frequent and the colon critical, you see number 25. This is not acceptable. So this is a risk evaluation matrix that we establish for each medical device. We are going to write down that if the device, for example, is not working, if the plug is not working, for example, in this case, is it improbable? Is it remote? Is it again occasional, probable, or frequent? And then if the severity is negligible, minor, serious, major, or critical. In this case, we are going to pay attention to the plug. Same thing for the power, same thing for the monitoring, same thing for any sensor that device has, same thing for any component that the device has. We are going to look into the risk evaluation matrix, and we establish that for each device that we have. Now, looking into the summary of effective design input, requirements, they must be measurable, they must be quantifiably verified and validated, so for each and every function. Then they need to, of course, contain strong statements such as the device shall do this, the device shall do that, etc. The device shall have what. And then it must be concise and usually not that ambiguous. Then it must specify design intent, but not how device should be designed. This is only the intent, and we already went over the definition of the intent. We look into, again, what are the functions that we are looking at in a device. So this is for the device, for the design input, and the design input is just, again, as we already talked about, it's going to be measurable, quantifiable, verified, and validated, again, function. And this is coming, again, from the interaction between the patients, physicians, and the engineer. Now, of course, the design input should not be conflicting, should be comprehensive, must be traceable, and we have to discuss if it's feasible with the existing technologies or tools that we have. It must also address functionality, performance, and talk about or address, of course, the user interface. And then it should organize requirements for efficiency, breaking down requirements by function. So mechanical, software, electrical, etc. Thank you so very much again for joining me for today's class. I hope that you enjoyed this lecture, and I wish you all a very good day. Thank you.